Today's show is sponsored by Do It. Cloud spend is just the surface. What really matters is how it drives performance, reliability, and speed to market. Do It Cloud Intelligence aligns every dollar to the intent of the workloads. Do It is trusted by companies like Fiverr, HackerRank, Current, and Superbet. Do It helps teams go beyond dashboards, surfacing hidden inefficiencies, resolving incidents faster, and aligning cloud operations with business priorities. One platform, unified signals, better outcomes across engineering and finance. Visit doit.com, that's DOIT.com, to unlock intent-aware FinOps at scale. Do It Cloud Intelligence.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. Another weekend perspective, a Labor Day perspective for here in the United States, and for those of you outside the States, probably a well-deserved day of having to deal with us here in the United States for a day as we celebrate labor. Hope everybody's doing well. We get a chance here in the States to take a couple of extra days to sort of vacation, I guess, if you will, take a break from work. You're supposed to celebrate the importance of labor, of work, of those sorts of things. But it gives you a little bit of time to think. I got a chance to actually hang out with Aaron a little bit in person, which is something we don't do as much as we used to do. But anyways, things are good. I've been thinking a lot. We recorded a Cloud and AI News of the Month just the other day with Aaron and Brandon, and there's a lot of back and forth about a lot of topics. But one of them was just sort of, what's going on with AI. Not anything in particular, but I kind of walked away from it. And some of the stuff I was thinking about this weekend is it does feel like every day, every week, every couple of weeks is sort of the actual embodiment of the Gartner hype cycle, in which there are troughs of disillusionments and peaks of excitement on a daily basis. And it's kind of really hard to kind of get your bearings around, what's up, what's down, where are things going? Are things making progress in ways that are realistic, or are they, strictly hype? Do the economics work out for this stuff? It feels like on any given day and any given week, we're sort of all over the place. And so I thought I would dig into that a little bit today and just sort of try and wrap my head around how I'm thinking about, a world in which there is what feels like a lot of chaos, a lot of change, a lot of mixed signals from any given day to day, and kind of how to think about it, especially as we think about both the consumer markets around AI and what's happening there with all the big AI investment and so forth, and the more enterprise markets, the business-related markets, and how the two of them are connected, but how the two of them may not necessarily be on the same trajectories for good reasons. So I'm going to dig into that after the break.
Today's show is sponsored by Vasion Print. Technology should drive your business, not slow it down. But legacy print systems are a resource suck. Don't waste time and money managing print when there's a solution. Vasion Print, formerly known as Printer Logic. Eliminate resource-intensive print servers and make the switch to an intuitive, cloud-native solution that makes printing effortless for IT teams and end users. Reduce attack surfaces and secure your environment while enjoying cloud-native flexibility that's easily supported in a hybrid workforce. It's not a patch or a fix. It's a truly seamless solution for print. See for yourself by scheduling a demo at vasion.com. That's VASION.com.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dig a little bit into this, feeling that I said, it feels like every week around the AI space feels like a kind of human, reality of sort of the wave of the Gartner hype, Gartner hype cycle, right? The peak of expectations, the trough of disillusionment, everything in between on a regular basis, maybe is the wrong word, irregular, extremely fast, irrational basis in some cases. And the more I thought about it, the more I've been trying to wrap my head around, okay, whenever things seem chaotic, whenever things seem like there is constant change, there's nothing to necessarily focus on, or it's the equivalent of like when you're out on the ocean in a boat and there's a lot of waves and you're just trying to figure out how do I fix my gaze on the horizon, because everything else is going to sort of disorient you, if you will. And And so I started making a list of all these things, just, not any real specific announcement, but sort of, just, trends and announcements and so on and so forth in terms of, are they ups? Are they downs? Are they question marks? Like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But then I really tried to step back and think about, can you put a framework around this such that, if you're trying to explain this to people, if you're trying to make decisions around it, if you're trying to plan for things, are there things that you can plan around right now? And then are there things that you just have to go, well, we'll see where that goes. Let's try and, model out maybe what a better scenario could be. But if it goes far left, or if it goes far right, or if it goes way up or it goes way down, we should be able to adapt to that. We sort of have that built in, if you will. And so, I sort of started with, a couple of things in terms of just big macro level things that I think help shape the way to, go about thinking about the market in this space, or the technology in this space, right? And the first one is, we have to remember, and again, we're coming out of, 10, 15 plus years of cloud computing, in which, cloud computing kind of originated as just an evolution of what we think of as IT, but it created a bunch of new things that we didn't necessarily have, right? So, as much as you could have looked at, for example, cloud computing as like, well, that's like IT without all the tickets. You get it sort of on demand, and you can make an API call and get what used to take a ServiceNow ticket or a 2 or 3 week ticket to get something provisioned manually by somebody. That wasn't necessarily a consumer thing. It was felt a little bit like an enterprise thing, but yet the earliest adopters of this were the people who were, building businesses. They were building technology for business, but they weren't necessarily worried about, like, what are the regulations around this? What skills and processes do I currently have in place, right? So there was a lot of, like, the faster adopters were the people who didn't necessarily have the baggage of legacy IT to deal with. And then over time, Amazon and others had to adapt what they did to sort of fit what enterprises did, so that their amount of change wasn't that much. And so it didn't necessarily feel like a consumer technology or an enterprise technology in particular. It felt like a very much, a technology that we kind of knew, we kind of understood, but at the same time, it was like, oh, well, if you stretch this in certain ways, it can really be used in to address problems in ways that we really couldn't before, right? So it was more of a change technology than anything. And AI feels a little bit different in that it feels, like more of a replacing technology. And I think when you're dealing with a replacing technology, and that's not 100% true. Obviously, there's times when it's an augmenting technology as well, but it just feels like sort of a different category than what we had with cloud. And so a lot of the things that we sort of model it after cloud, there are certain behaviors that we've seen that are repetitive, but we kind of have to think about it differently. And so the first thing I always sort of think about is, there is distinctly a number of people, if we sort of boil this whole thing down, there are a number of people who very much think of AI as a technology, especially in the consumer space, and sort of extend it out to the advertising space, in which they see this as a replacement technology, right? Like, they're looking at two of the largest businesses in the world, i.e. Facebook and Google, in terms of their absolute dominance of advertising on the internet, the largest, biggest, best business model that we've ever seen. And they're going, okay, this technology could upend that, could replace that, could augment it in certain ways. And because the search market and the advertising market around that have very much been winner take all, or leader takes the majority of it, right? And again, I point to those two, and those two both have tremendous businesses in that space, but there aren't a dozen companies in that space, right? There are 2 or 3, and obviously Amazon, in their sort of captive world, have a very strong advertising business. But the reason we're seeing such incredible investment isn't necessarily because people are thinking, oh, well, this is going to be able to augment, the legal department of a bunch of banks by 20% or 30%. They are first and foremost looking at this as, could this be potentially, disruptive and or replacive and or whatever to that gigantic advertising model, right? And then once you get beyond that, then you start to go, okay, when I think about that sort of explains and provides rationalization for why there is so much VC investment in this, why there is so much insane amounts of movement of people, why the salaries for certain individuals in this are so incredibly high, because it is very much a mindset, a strategy of sort of winner take all for the largest business model that we've ever seen, the most profitable business model we've ever seen. And then from there, we sort of back out of that and go, okay, but the same technology and potentially many of the same sort of foundational building blocks are also going to be applicable to enterprise markets, to chatbots and developer assistants and document summary agents and all these sort of things, right? So that's sort of the first thing that I have to kind of always remember from a rationalization perspective is, the billions of dollars that OpenAI is dealing with or whatever it is. While we can talk about agents and so forth, right? You have to remember that the ultimate goal is a much much bigger TAM, if you will, than building agents necessarily. Now, agents are sort of a byproduct of doing that, and what that's going to look like. So that's the first thing I got to keep in mind. The second thing I sort of think about in this is, are we far enough into this market, or are we too far into this market? Are we too early in this market to have healthy competition, right? Like, are we seeing new ideas come? Are we seeing enough competition to where it is driving better outcomes for customers? Are we seeing enough competition to where there's price competition, there's feature competitive competition, and so forth? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think even though we've seen fits and starts from different companies that you would expect to be doing well in this marketplace, we're still only a couple of years into this sort of generative AI thing. Again, we'll go back to it's going to be 3 years here in Thanksgiving of this year. So, I think there's healthy competition. I think a lot of people would sort of argue, the models themselves are getting similar. You can pick and choose from a whole bunch of different ones, and again, depends what use case you're working on. But I think there's a lot of healthy competition. Are there market leaders yet? Yes, sort of, right? But I think even this is still in the healthy competition stage. I think you could argue that ChatGPT is the most well-known brand name at this point. They probably have the largest amount of revenue, although I think just given the number of companies that are signing up for Copilot or Gemini or other types of things, I think there's definitely revenue being made here. Anthropic is making some money around Claude and so forth. But yeah, I mean there are market leaders, I think. But I think what's going to be interesting to see is, of those 5 or 6 or 7 that we all think of as sort of leading, the ones who are building labs and frontier models and all that sort of stuff, do they all sort of stay viable? And then beyond that, like, does that just become a portion of the market in the same way that like there used to be lots of databases, but Oracle sort of won out. They took the majority of the market, but yet the spend in the market and the needs in terms of technology across things is far, far bigger than, just an operating system or just a database or, whatever it might be. It's in networking, it's in security, it's in all sorts of other, development frameworks and other stuff. So I think we're in the early days of saying, are there market leaders? Yes. Are they sort of shaping certain behaviors? Yes. But, we've talked about it a bunch in the show, even where we thought Microsoft was a year ago is far different than where we are now. So we're still seeing a lot of violent, rapid change happening in the marketplace. So leader is still sort of a fluffy word more than anything. Is there a well-defined business model? Well-defined, profitable business model? I think the answer to that right now is sort of a resounding no. I think but again, this is one of these things in which, knowing what the market now knows, and again, knowing that the sort of eye on the prize way of thinking about this, especially from the VC community and the largest, cloud providers, research labs, is they expect this, especially on the consumer side, to be a winner take all. And knowing what they have spent to get to the points where they are today from the pre-AI world, I think they would feel relatively justified in the amount of money they're spending, because essentially, like Sundar Pichai said, a year and a half ago, CEO of Google and Alphabet, like, this isn't a market that you can sort of underspend in the early days and hope to catch up, right? The amount of pace of change and velocity of change and so forth is, you have to spend quite a bit. So, we're seeing massive amounts of spending that kind of skews the ability for it to be profitable anytime soon. I don't think what we've seen yet is sort of that aha moment where somebody's like, oh, wait, chatbots have unlocked this unbelievable new business model, right? I don't think we've reached that point yet, whether or not any of these are profitable or not. So again, this is going to be, maybe it's agents, maybe it's something that we haven't seen invented yet, but it doesn't feel like yet there is a sort of aha, like, that's search, or that's digital advertising, or that's operating system lock-in with hundreds of hardware vendors, or like, we haven't seen that next Microsoft, Google, Facebook, business model emerge yet, and that's fine. And we may not see that for a couple of years, and we may see it sort of slog along for a few years. Does there appear to be a open, low-cost alternative emerging yet? And this is sort of the open source question, but also sort of the lower cost alternative. I guess yes and no. We have seen certain things emerge around open source that have been good. We've seen not necessarily exactly open source the way that the diehard Linux open source people would want it to be, but we've seen investment from people like Llama, or Microsoft with Llama, Meta with Llama. We've seen stuff with like VLM. We've seen a number of technologies and open models and open weights and so forth be out there as alternatives. So I think the answer to that to a certain extent is yes. But have any of them become a true alternative to the really, really high end ones? Not necessarily. Just in terms of like awareness, the same way that you would say like Android was an alternative, lower cost alternative to iPhone, for example. And again, this goes back to, Android was able to succeed because it sort of piggybacked on the Google business model. There isn't necessarily a business model to piggyback on from an open perspective yet. So having an alternative, the thing that doesn't have a business model yet, is kind of a tricky conversation to have. So not necessarily there yet. And then the last thing I had in my big sort of macro way of thinking about this was in terms of usage patterns, are there sort of known usage patterns, or are they usage patterns emerging? And I think to a certain extent you could say yes, right? We've said for a couple of years now, chatbots of various ilk, multimodal chatbots and, inputs that are, multi-input sort of chatbots and stuff. Yep, that's a usage pattern that's emerged. Developer assistants, the copilots, the cursors, the Claudes of the world. Yep, those have emerged. Various types of variations on the chatbots that are, look at these documents, summarize these, create some templates and stuff. Those have emerged. Usage patterns in terms of agents, I think is perceived to be sort of the next big area. And I think people are putting a lot of expectation on agents as a big bucket. I think we're going to have to see, how that sort of breaks down into sort of micro fragmentations for, what you can do with an agent, how complete can it be, how autonomous can it be, how expert would you expect that to be? Are you building agents that essentially are replacements for interns, junior level people, PhD rocket scientists? Still to be determined. So that's sort of a yes and no in terms of usage patterns emerging. Anyways, so I started making my list of things that were sort of ups and downs, and things that were peaks of expectations and troughs of disillusionment, and it does feel like there is a lot of variation. There's a lot of sort of ups and downs. So let me hit on a few, and I'll highlight a few of the ones that I had marked as question marks, because I think those are the areas that if some of those kind of get worked out, if they are perceived to be more positive than negative or more negative than positive, we'll have a little better understanding of the market, a little better way to build a mental model of what you think is going to happen, and you can then go take actions upon that. We have seen constant high profile level investments. We've seen constant high profile CAPEX spending. So the amount of money flowing into this has been enormous, probably more than we've ever seen at the velocity that we've never seen. So you can look at this as positive or negative. I think as a whole, we would, in technology, we tend to think of it as positive because the sentiment behind investing it tends to be positive. Now, is it dumb money in some cases? Maybe, right? Is it too much at some point without the results? Maybe, but it's better. In technology, we tend to see the cutoff when people think all of a sudden it's a bad idea is just dramatic, and so we haven't necessarily seen that yet. Now, that doesn't mean next quarter we won't see that, but so far, we have seen high investment, high spending levels, rapid growth of user bases. People are using this in different ways, whether or not they totally understand it or they're getting great benefits to be determined. But we're seeing that. And we are seeing growing revenues at some companies. So we are seeing at least some proclivity for people to actually spend money on it rather than expect it to be free. Now, those, where it's coming from is sort of skewed. Obviously, the what we would call the pickaxe companies, the NVIDIAs and Broadcoms, the hardware companies are probably making way more money than the frontier lab ones who are still spending tons of money continuing to train these gigantic models. But we've seen revenue numbers come out from NVIDIA and OpenAI and Google and Microsoft and Anthropic and others. So those you would sort of consider ups at this point, or pros. I think we are also seeing losses. And again, this goes back to the sort of economic model, right? We're seeing losses at levels that we haven't necessarily seen before. Now, part of this is we're seeing losses at the companies like an OpenAI, who have no other revenue streams, who have no other way to buffer that. So again, they're trying to build something from scratch. So take that with a grain of salt. We are seeing very frequent high-profile movement by key people at high companies. And so part of this is, you are dealing with very smart people who, have high perceptions of themselves. You have, this, shift from, are we building something that is, somehow for the good of humanity or the good of mankind? There are, sort of religious, cultish sort of underlying tones in this somewhat, and then you've got, people who are jumping ship because they don't like the other person or they want to be in charge, or so some of that is probably pretty natural, especially again in very, very high stakes, high visibility types of things. Personalities come into this as much as anything. A couple of things on the downside. We are the AI seems to have, not AI the technology, but AI the market seems to have broken sort of the startup market and somewhat the investment market, right? We are seeing frequent partial acqui-hires of founders and key engineers, but not entire companies. So this whole model that we've had of working at startups, unless you are the key person, it basically feels broken or dead at this point, right? Like there's no reason why you would, potentially go work for one of these startups unless you are, again, one of the absolute key engineers or one of the sort of founding people, because the odds are those people are going to get snapped up by one of the larger companies. The rest of you are going to get discarded. So that risk level, to take for long hours and lower pay in some cases, or equity that may never vest, that seems to be sort of broken. Now, again, that's a model that's been difficult for a long time. I mean, startups are very difficult to begin with, but it feels like that very much is broken. The secondary markets, we're seeing, where companies are selling their sort of, for entire equity bases, selling off startup shares, bypassing traditional secondary markets, bypassing public markets. It feels like the idea of, the public owning, these companies, having ability to own these companies at any point in time may be broken, right? We may never see an IPO of OpenAI. I mean, it does feel like at some point we have to, given the level of investment, but, it feels like they feel like they can get their money out of it, at least for the employees and so forth, faster than having to go through all the things of a public offering. And given kind of where their financials are, I guess it sort of makes sense. But it does feel like those guardrails that we had in place, or those things that allowed the market to participate in these things more than they can today, feels broken or sort of gone. We don't yet, and I've mentioned this before on other shows. It doesn't feel like we have a Netflix of AI from an enterprise perspective. Like there isn't that company that's talking about how they are doing something very different that feels very different yet with AI, and it also doesn't feel like we have a kind of a seminal lighthouse AI agent success story company either. So again, I always sort of use customer success, customer willingness to talk about things as an important milestone, and it doesn't quite feel like we're there. I mean, there's lots of examples of people saying, "Hey, we deployed Copilot for 50,000 people." Okay, great. So you turned a license on, right? Or we have this one or two things that that save us some money, and those are great. But it doesn't yet feel like we have the one that everybody is talking about and everybody's surprised about. And maybe right now we're just going to see dozens of smaller stories, and that's okay. But we don't necessarily see that yet. What else do we have here? There was an article that came out here recently. It was an MIT study that talked about enterprise companies are struggling to create ROI for their projects in their early days. I think this makes sense. Right now you have the most expensive computing, which in and of itself is very, very hard to get in terms of GPUs. In many cases, companies are just using the models that are made default available to them, which are the largest models. So the ability to deeply customize the model specifically for you, the adoption of smaller models, competitiveness in the AI accelerator market is still, while the AMDs and TPUs and Inferentia and all these sort of things are trying hard. NVIDIA is still taking up the bulk of the money, and NVIDIA is still considered very much a premium product in terms of that. I think the enterprise is still very, very much in early stages, learning stages, trying to figure out how to make things economically viable. So there's a lot going on there. Other things I have in my kind of question mark is, like at what point do we start to see, and again, this may not happen anytime soon, this sort of consumer winner-take-all mindset from AI companies. I think that's where they're investing. I don't know that they've signaled that, as much kind of outwardly, because you do have this weird, Google doesn't necessarily want to talk about things replacing search. They're trying to augment their own moat. You've got Facebook, which, their business is still very much advertising based on sort of profiling. They don't really want to talk about sort of kind of replacing that, but obviously they're beginning to see some AI things, enhance their profitability. But and then you see people like OpenAI who on a given week or given month seem to have a different use case that they want to sort of highlight. So, they seem to be taking sort of a, spreading peanut butter all over the place kind of approach. I'll put a link in the show notes. There's sort of a famous business article written about sort of the peanut butter approach that people like Yahoo took that was unfortunately not terribly successful. So, there's a lot of that sort of going on. But yeah, I think overall, the more and more I think about this, I think you have to keep coming back to a couple foundational questions. Again, what does the competitive market look like? What are you focusing on what you're doing from a consumer perspective versus an enterprise perspective? If you're focusing on it from an enterprise perspective, your timeline probably needs to be longer than like now. And I know that's sort of hard because right now we're seeing a lot of C-level people who are demanding stuff within the enterprise, that want stuff right now, that are willing to spend right now. What that means is you've got to figure out a way to have some successful projects. You've got to have a couple of winners, a couple of things that you can start to talk about within your organization, even if they're not necessarily economically viable, if they are providing, the type of results that you're looking for. So whether that's augmenting people or offsetting, certain things, or being able to speed up a process, I think that's going to be just as important as, whether or not they're fully economically viable. Because we have to assume at some point in time, if this AI stuff is going to succeed, it's going to grow, it's going to become the next internet or the next cloud or whatever the next trend is. We've never seen a previous generation in which the mass majority of the computing is premium, right? It always comes down. It always becomes commoditized. It always drives prices lower, and we've got to see that in far greater levels. But the good news is so the technology itself does seem very, very powerful. Does seem very, very I'll use the word intelligent, but able to create things that, at least at speeds that we've never seen from humans, is considered to be very, very valuable. So, I think from an enterprise perspective, you have to be interested in the technology. You have to be, sort of looking for ways to leverage it. But I think at the same time, you have to be cautious about the timing of when you expect to see success, in the same way that you would have seen with cloud. Because again, from cloud, we were already at a point where the compute was fairly commoditized. It became even more commoditized as cloud emerged and matured. We're not anywhere near that with GPUs at this point, right? They're still heavily supply constrained, and hence pricing is still very, very high. So, a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of stuff to sort of, take in. But I think if you're feeling at all overwhelmed by some of the, again, the thrashing around, the chaos, the daily change, the weekly change, the big headlines around AI, I think it's important to step back, to sort of have a mental framework that you can think about some things, think about where your perspective is in it, how much of these things are really impactful to you, how many of them just need to sort of play out because, competition will find its level, pricing will hopefully eventually find its level, and some of the things that feel way out of whack will begin to normalize. And and we can expect that as that happens, companies will find ways to build technologies that can become profitable, that can become sustainable, that can become managed and secured, and all those sort of things. So, we have a tendency to do that as technologies mature and so forth. So, anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Lots to think about, but I think having some sort of way of thinking about it that doesn't feel like every day is a shiny rock and a hey look bird and all that kind of stuff, is going to be helpful, at least in terms of if you are responsible for taking a broader view of what's going on with the AI market space. So with that, wrap it up. Hope everybody's having a good Labor Day weekend if you're here in the States, or if you're able to get a few days off and rest and relax. And with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.